Hey class, I wanted to give you a quick little video recording of my process, just since it's a little bit different than the online tutorials that I shared, and so that you had something to fall back on that I went over in class, or if you weren't in class. So, reminder, this is the process from Illustrator into Photoshop. So, if you're already in Photoshop moving stuff around and creating layers, then you don't need to do this process. But if you have your artwork in Illustrator like I do here, remember that you have to have each one of your frames of animation on its own layer. So again, that's not the paths that you've created, but you've moved paths or copied paths in new layers down here. So a new layer for each path. So that's what you can see with my wave example. So once I have everything on their own layers, I can export. So File, Export. And I want to make sure I choose down here in Format a Photoshop file, PSD. So I'm just going to, since I've saved this several times, I'm going to put a 5 here, but you can see. Just need the PSD extension and export, and it should create Photoshop file. Now you get this window where you can set up a different screen resolution. So I went ahead and left it at screen since I don't need it any larger, but if your artwork's really small, you could save this at a higher resolution if you want. The main thing is you need to make sure right layers is checked. I'm going to hit OK. And you'll see here there's what I just saved out, Wave 5 PSD. So I'm going to open that in Photoshop by double-clicking it. Alright, so we're here in Photoshop, and what you should see here is all your layers if you exported it from Illustrator the right way. And then if you don't see the timeline down here, you need to make sure you go to Window, Workspace, and enable the Motion workspace. After you do that, now you should see this, and you have two options: create frame animation or create video timeline. So whichever one you see, video timeline was the one I showed you in the very first class where we created layers one by one in Photoshop, and you could set duration. In this case, since we already have layers built, an easier method is just to create a frame animation from those layers. So I'm going to switch this to create frame animation and click this button. Let me move this. So right now you only see one, but that's just because you have to do one more step. Over here there's a menu. You have the timeline, and you click on that, and you want to make frames from layers. So now it recognizes each of these layers and puts it as a frame. So if I were to play through this, you'd see the wave. Yay. Alright, and now we're ready to export it out. So I'm going to go to File, Export, Save for Web, and I can double check if your colors are at 256. I think by default. For what I'm doing, that's only a few colors. I can go to a much smaller number here, and that will make my GIF a smaller size. So now you can see it's only, it's less than 6 kilobytes. If you're doing something that's color, play around with this to make sure it looks the way you want, but is the smallest size possible. Another thing to check is if you brought something over at a really high resolution is look down here to see what your image size is. Make sure this isn't something above like 1,000 pixels width or height. Otherwise you're probably exporting something too large and it's going to be way too big. So you can simply just type in something under 1,000, and this will keep the aspect ratio the same. Last thing to do is change the animation from once to forever, so it creates a loop, and then you are ready to save. So it should already have the GIF on there. Don't forget the naming convention. So your first name, last name, underscore, loading GIF. I've already saved it with that name, so you won't have to do this, but I'm going to replace it. And then you can see there is your loading GIF right here. If you hit spacebar, it will play the GIF. And that's what you turn in. All right, thanks.